Geography is all about the physical landscapes and cool natural features of an area, like oceans, mountains, or forests. When we see the term geography, there's a few presuppositions that most people think of. Firstly, there's a planet of some sort. Secondly, that planet is probably a sphere, maybe it's flat if that's the creative direction. And third, the planet has to have cool natural features. And for the monster world, these three presuppositions hold true. For the most part anyways. We'll get to it later, but in the modern day, the monster world is shaped like a torus. Or, that is to say, a donut. Now, My Singing Monsters has two main games, both taking place at a different time in the world, and both with very different geography. Since it could be pertinent to know what both eras were like, let's go over the monster world's geography in a timeline-like fashion, first beginning with the Dawn of Fire. The monster world, like many other universes, started out as a flower on the multiversal tree, the Stablo Miejrica, which translates in Croatian as bubble tree. Once pollinated, these florets spring into bountiful universes. Now starts the life of the monster world. In the beginning of the monster world, there was a Big Bang-like event, called the Big Clanger. From this event came the Celestials, the many stars in the sky, and our first major geographic feature, the living core. The living core is the volcanic core of the monster world. It was the epicenter of the Big Bang-like event, and is where the fire celestial, Furnos, was forged. Furnos was eventually shot out of the living core from a volcano, which itself is also referred to as the living core. Inside of the volcano is a bunch of molten candle wax, and a mass of relics that the Colossals made there by combining sap from the Stablo Miejrica and musical potential. The Colossals, the creator deities of the world, then built off of this potent living core of fire to create the rest of the monster world, which, at this point, was a sphere. Thanks to the water celestial, Hornicle, the monster world gained an ocean, the living ocean. The living ocean has several unique qualities. Firstly, its waters are very corrosive to human teeth. Secondly, it has the ability to evolve entities from outside the monster world into monsters. Third, it can cause spontaneous splitting like gremlins. And fourth, monsters can breathe inside of it and don't drown. Also existing deep below the surface of the living ocean is the Monstriana Trench, the deepest point in the vast ocean. For the most part, the planet is completely covered in ocean. That's except for, of course, its crowning jewel, the continent. One large landmass of unity between the natural monsters. It is made of 5 conjoined elemental lands as well as the living core volcano. There's the plant lands, the cold lands, the air lands, the water lands, and the earth lands. As time goes on, the water level drops, and different tectonic shifts eventually cause all 5 lands to be seen. For the most part, the continent sits on quiet fault lines. It is important to note that the sizes of the continent and the other islands are not to scale as we see them in the games. A single land of the continent, for example, is sized anywhere from Fiji to Australia, I think was the scale, it's a pretty big scale. And the entire continent is essentially a megacontinent with 6 conjoined Australias. And as such, has so many geographical features that we probably don't even know about, such as vast forests, plains, and meadows, or hills and high mountain peaks, or deep ravines that are all flattened out for the purposes of gameplay. That being said, there are a few confirmed geographical features on the continent. Each elemental land has its own biome and geographical features that play into that. Plant lands are seen with rich soil and verdant vegetation. The cold lands are depicted as a high snow-capped mountain range, and the air lands are depicted as a high stony mesa-like desert landscape. The water lands are bluish-green, and since they were underwater originally, are covered in coral, and the earth lands are very hot, with deep browns, reds, hot oranges, and yellows, as it was previously underground and recently moved into the spotlight due to seismic shifts. Other geographic features include, and are hopefully not limited to, the continent has at least one river, fed by a waterfall from a cave in the Coldland snow-capped mountains, that flows through the plant lands past the living core, and out through the waterlands, where it waterfalls yet again into the ocean below. The aforementioned Coldland mountain range has an entrance to a wonderful mine and a cave system, known collectively as the Wonder Mine, where the most intriguing items can be recovered. The Airlands has arches, stacks, and butts, and an unsupported cliff arm that juts out over the living ocean. At the point of convergence between the three lands of plant, cold, and air, there's a solid stone plateau. The Earthlands have magma spewing out of it from many holes across its shore, and other geothermal vents poking out of its landscape, glowing hot yellow-orange. The Waterlands has monstrous tentacles around it, which are hopefully safe. While the rest of the planet is mostly blank and covered with water, there are 6 other locations in this timeframe and dimension. Firstly, atop the Great Living Ocean, a glub pole swims with a massive rock atop its back. This place was called Party Island. Down underground, closest to the living core of all islands, was Cave Island, a dank dwelling surrounded by pools of water. Up in the sky, there was a mass of dense fog and mist called Cloud Island. This locale had rainbows bridging the platforms, and a paper lamp representative of the sun. Up even higher was Space Island, a dense moon named Staggeron 4, encircled by rings of stone. And up yet higher, hovering directly over top of the continent, was Starhenge. This levitating piece of clockwork is where Celestials resided, and it was positioned halfway between the stars from which the Celestials originate and the living core, from which Starhenge draws its power to stay floating. The final location within the bounds of the monster world is the Colosseum. This marvel of masonry was created when a colossal spirit named Linista was in need of a way to ready the monsters for a cataclysmic extinction-level event. Linista found a deserted landmass and imbued its spirit upon it, alike to a ghost inhabiting an object, which gave the island vague facial features, and created the Colosseum. That's everything that was on the monster world's main planet at this point in time. But off-planet, there's also the Pocket Dimension, the Higher Plane, and the home planet of Anglo. The home planet of Anglo, to be honest, there's not much to say about this one. All that we know is that Anglo comes from it, and that it's also where the original Pinghound is from. Not the Pinghound we know, but the Pinghound, Anglo's friend Pinghound that inspired his dream of the common now Pinghound. The Higher Plane. At this point in time, the Higher Plane was only accessible to Colossals. It holds 2 contingency plans for if there is ever a cataclysmic event to fracture the continent. One of these islands is for all monsters of the fire element, called Amber Island, and the other is for monsters without the fire element, called Gold Island. Amber Island is orange and, as the name suggests, covered in amber from the mighty but mercurial Stablomyehricha. It also contains the green trees of the continent's plantlands, and the foliage of an entire other dimension of the multiverse that was called the Grapefruit Grove. Gold Island is yellowed, and as the name suggests, wearing a solid gold crown, encrusted with green gems. Throughout the framework of the crown are many gilded statues of plant life, harps, and various creatures that once roamed freely throughout the monster world. Both of these islands are atop the heads of Colossals, the Queen and King Colossal respectively, and as such, have facial features denoting their presence. The Pocket Dimension. Before the Colossals created the continent and its monsters, they first experimented with the ability of creation in the Pocket Dimension. The landscape they left behind later went on to become Ethereal Island. This experimental landscape is colored on the cooler side of the spectrum with vibrant purples, blues, and pinks. The island's edges are dotted with crystalline spikes, hanging with vines and horns, and towards the back of the island are the exposed brains of the Colossal, who also carries the most eyes of any we've ever seen, with 7. Around the backsides, there are bubble-ejecting tubes that lead further inside. Within, there exists a sizable space that houses the inner biologics of the Ethereal Colossal. This cavern is called the Ethereal Workshop. It itself has 3 eyes, so the Colossal might overall have 10. In a specific nook of the landscape of the island, called the Ethereal Meadow, fabric of reality seems to have frayed, allowing for other dimensions of the multiverse to cross through into the landscape, such as the cliff of mountain morsels from the Thumpyverse. In the future, this is the same location where a group of ghasts summoned a group of portals to teleport the Magical Singles to Magical Sanctum. Speaking of, Magical Sanctum may or may not have existed at this time, depending on whether or not the Great Titan Enchantler had its fated altercation with the Colossals. Another thing that I should mention before the next section is the Prism Gate. The Prism Gate is an interdimensional portal with a hijinkerous personality. Thanks in part to its tremendous powers over space-time, the Prism Gate expanded each of the outer islands, giving them more platforms. As fate would have it, a cataclysmic quake struck the continent. This turbulent quake ripped the monster world asunder. Since the continent was on a central pole of the spherical monster world, and the seism radiated outward from this point, casting all of its elemental lands outward to form a circle around the epicenter of the event, the torn planet resembled a torus, or that is to say, a donut. The waterlands were returned into the depths of the sea from which they hailed, and so was the volcano of the living core, trapping all of the fire monsters inside of its vast network of cave systems for the foreseeable eternity. The outer islands were raptured by the Prism Gate in the blink of an eye, effectively leaving no trace of where they once were. The Glubpool underneath of Party Island fled the scene, living into the modern day as a grown-up adult Glubber. In the place of Cloud Island, clouds still gathered due to weather patterns, leaving a field of dense clouds. Cave Island grew to have a diverse ecosystem of fauna and flora beneath the surface, which has now become fossilized. I don't really recall Space Island leaving anything behind. Since Starhenge was powered by the continent and its living core of fire, which was irreparably damaged, it will eventually crash into the planet's surface. But for now, it has some backup power that will only postpone the poised perch's perilous plunge. Alike to the core, the Colosseum also disappeared beneath the roaring tides, to hopefully be seen again someday. And in the modern day, in the donut hole, residing where the continent used to be, is the higher plane, housing the aforementioned reunification and preservation projects. The chaos eventually subsided and the tectonics eventually settled in to their new toroidal shape. The outer equator of the monster world is now nicknamed the Seam, and it, like to the ethereal meadow, is well known for having greater connections to the human world. The continent's elemental lands were renamed to the natural islands after the natural elements they represent, now being called Plant Island, Cold Island, Air Island, Water Island, and Earth Island. The remnant of the fire monsters trapped within the now sunken living core established a settlement known as Fire Haven. All 6 of these islands, and all, or most of the islands that we'll talk about in the future, have faces on them, due to either being part Colossal or Titan, or being inspired by one of those 2 groups. I guess I should explain this here. Colossal islands are literal geologic islands that just have a spirit that took it on as a body. Titan islands, however, are gargantuan, titanic even, biological beasts. Think of it as living atop of a megafauna, or the lice living on your head, digging through your pores. This post-cataclysmic era of the monster world is marked as being a dark age during which no innovation or discovery happened by monsters. But that doesn't mean that outsiders had no impact on their world. An enigmatic entity known as the Stair-Shaper, known for hopping to and fro between many dimensions of the multiverse and hitchhiking between galaxies, sent some of its loyal disciples, Titans named Phosphora, Krovlaft, Facade, and Necrol, into the monster world to take the places of each of the outer islands. Phosphora roams the same path that Party Island swam, guided by the beautiful Aurora Monstralis, which is, fun fact, is an alter form of the Prism Gate. Krovlaft took the place of Space Island, and is just barely in orbit. Facade took protection in the field of dense clouds left by the absence of Cloud Island. It also seems to be encircled by rings of a mushroom forest, and is floating in the air. Necrol went into the depths of the monster world, and took the place of Cave Island. The Stair-Shaper made its own sort of island out in the beyond, the crossroads of the greater multiverse not residing in the monster world. It dubbed this place Magical Nexus. And finally, the last bit before we get into the modern day, in the dream space, the roaming lands of the Dreamcrafter, who, as the name implies, crafts dreams for monsters, creates a mythical island for the mythical monsters. This island, like the Dawn of Fire Islands, doesn't have any consciousness whatsoever, being crafted purely of hematite. And the dream space itself is thought to be on the moon, which itself is known for traveling through the donut hole. Thanks for watching. Tune in for the next episode of Monster Geography.